Oh my, I'm a long way away. Can you see me? Yeah. Okay, so I just prefaced in my conversation with Markham that we'd be going straight into a regulatory panel, so here we are. And I'm actually going to ask each of my wonderful panelists to introduce themselves, so would you like to start?
Morning, everyone, and thank you to the Family Online Safety Institute and Stephen for having me here this morning. I'm Niamh Hodnett. I'm Ireland's Online Safety Commissioner. I was appointed on the 15th of March this year. So the last time when I was in this fabulous room, I barely had my feet under the desk. I'm back here today, and I feel, as the Australian E-Safety Commissioner says, I've aged in dog years. So I've had lot more information. I'm a lot more conscious of what I don't know this time around. I'm a lawyer by background, and I have experience of working regulatory frameworks, both in-house as an in-house lawyer in the telco regulatory framework, and also in a previous communications regulator, Comreg, here in Ireland. So my role in Ireland's Media Commission, Commission Naman, the Gaelic for Media Commission, as Online Safety Commissioner, is to establish and enforce the regulatory framework for online safety.
Fantastic. Jill?
Thanks, Niamh. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you very much, FOSI, for having us, and also Google for hosting us. My name's Gill Whitehead. I lead online safety for Ofcom in the UK. So in the UK, we are nearing the final furlong, I will call it, of having the online safety bill enacted. It's just left the committee stage of the Lords, and we at Ofcom are very well advanced in our preparations for that. We've had a bit of time to prepare, and we've been funded in that preparation. So I have the pleasure of working with a very expert team of over 300 people, drawn from tech sector, such as myself. I previously worked at Google, to organisations such as Five Rights and NSPCC, and law enforcement colleagues as well. So we've got a team who are really ready to begin on day one that our powers begin, and we will be consulting. And with that, and one of the reasons I'm here today, is we're really keen to work very closely with industry on those consultations, to make sure that we are absolutely approaching the implementation in a way that's going to be really effective, because the prize here for all of us, of course, is having a really helping people live safer lives online, especially children.
Great. Thanks. Lorna?
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks to FOSI generally and Google for inviting me. As you can see, I'm Lorna Woods. I'm Professor of Internet Law at the University of Essex and a member of the Human Rights Centre there. I've been working with Carnegie UK Trust for what seems an awful long time on what started out as online harms and has turned into online safety. And I have to make a confession right at the start that it's some of my research that started the UK government on its journey, though obviously DCMS and the government have done their own thing with that. So the bill is not my work.
We're going to come back to that, so don't you worry. Niamh, so I had the pleasure of meeting you and a couple of members of your staff in March. And it felt very modest, but I understand that you have some plans, some expensive plans. Can you want to just describe those a little bit? And also, I think your work program has just been published, correct?
That's right, Stephen, correct. We published our work program last week, the 20th of June, and that work program sets out what we're going to be achieving for our first year in existence. We've decided to look at the first year to end in February 2024, which is when the Digital Services Act becomes directly applicable for all organisations in the EU. So our work program in the area of online safety for our first year in existence is we are going to be designating services for regulation in line with our Online Safety and Media Regulation Act. We'll be consulting on this, and we'll also then be doing a wide call for inputs as to what should be in our first online safety code. We'll then be consulting on a draft online safety code and adopting that binding online safety code by the end of the year. We're doing a wide call for inputs on what should be in our first online safety code because we're very conscious that we don't have all the answers. We're one piece of the jigsaw as the regulator. the platforms themselves will have a good insight into what's required in relation to online safety on their platforms. As Markham said, we all share the responsibility. So whether it's parents and children, we will be very much having a child-centred approach in what we're doing, and we'll be consulting with children as well as to what should be contained in the first online safety code, with parents and with NGOs and civil societies, as well as government departments. So we really want to hear everyone's view as to what should be in our first online safety code, and then to adopt that online safety code at the end of the year. And the aim is it will be a binding online safety code, so non-compliance does attract civil and criminal sanctions. But the aim is not the stick with the sanctions. The aim is that we're all trying to make the internet, ensure that everyone's use of it, that it's a vibrant and safe place where people can participate safely online. In addition to the Online Safety and Media Regulation Act in Ireland, by virtue of our membership of the EU, at Commission Niamh, the Media Commission, we will also be joined by a Digital Services Commissioner later in the summer. And that Commissioner will have responsibility of overseeing the Digital Services Act implementation in Ireland, together with the European Commission in relation to the very large online platforms or the very large online search engines. And a lot of the VLOPSs and VLOSs also have their place of establishment in Ireland. So we're going to be working hand in glove with the European Commission in relation to the regulation of the Digital Services Act also. So they're both two key pieces of online safety that we'll be rolling out over the next year in Ireland. So our own online safety codes under our Online Safety and Media Regulation Act, and also the application of the Digital Services Act, it being an EU-wide measure as well. And our online safety code is another EU measure. It largely transposes the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. We will also be the regulator for the terrorist content online regulation. So we'll be rolling out procedures in relation to enforcement in relation to TCOR also. And we're going to play it by ear as to what happens in relation to the draft AI regulation or the draft CSAM regulation. They're also EU measures, but they're at draft stage at this point in time.
Great. Wow. You're going to be busy.
We'll be busy.
You're going to be hiring some staff too, right?
We're going to be hiring some staff. So to help us roll out our ambitious work plan, on our day of establishment on the 15th of March, the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland became Ireland's Media Commission on that day, Commission Niamh. So 40 staff of the BAI became Commission Niamh staff on that day. Since then, we've been setting up our corporate spine. So we had to set up a HR department, or a Human Resources and People a department, in order to help us ramp up recruitment. So we're now going to be hiring an additional 110 people. So we're up to about 50 at this point. So an additional 110 people to be able to fulfill our mandate in the startup phase. So this is our first year of operation.
Wow, wow. Well, speaking of ramping up, Jill, you've obviously just recently come on board. There's many others coming on. With all of this expansion, what are your top priorities, would you say?
So I think, I mean, Niamh's talked about the DSA, but I think and its regulatory cousin, if you like, but not identical twin, is the Online Safety Bill, soon to become the Online Safety Act in the UK. And that is a piece of systems and processes regulation, which is really designed to ensure that the governance is taken to understand risk, and where risk of harm, of either illegal content or harm to children is prevalent in the web, and then taking appropriate actions, so a duty of care for regulated services to take appropriate actions to reduce that risk of harm. And that's a problem that needs solving, despite the really good efforts that have taken place under self-regulation over the many years that have come. We can see from our research, from Ofcom's research, that 3/4 of 13 to 17-year-olds in the UK have experienced online harm in the last month. So one of the important things that systems and processes regulation can do is raise the floor so that we're applying really kind of common expectations and standards of what good looks like, and really working closely with platforms, large and small, to make sure that those standards are consistently applied so that we can reduce harm. So some of the things that I'm, really energized and would love to see, and I'm a mother, my kids are 9 and 10, so I do care about this quite passionately, but, children being really easily able to be befriended by adult strangers, which is a clear and well-evidenced path to grooming. We'd love to see real progress there. I think children, particularly vulnerable children, going down rabbit holes aided by algorithms, I think we'd love to see more progress to reduce the harms there. And equally, children stumbling across pornographic content easily on a sort of journey across the web. We'd love to see really strong progress there. So I think there are a number. When I was at Google, it always felt like a game of whack-a-mole, and I'm sure we will hopefully whack some moles together. It's not to say we can fix the internet overnight, or there will be one perfect, safe internet one day. I don't believe that. But I do think we can make some serious progress together on some of the really prevalent harms out there, particularly for children. So they will be my top priorities.
Wow, gosh. And just as a follow-up, I mean, Ofcom has not traditionally been involved in regulating the internet. How do you fit into the broader Ofcom mission, would you say?
So I think Ofcom is a converged communications regulator. So it has expertise that's relevant both from the networks and ISPs that underpin the web, all the way through to how spectrum's allocated, through which, obviously smartphone access is key. So it's got a lot of relevant and also a heritage through broadcasting regulation on really understanding freedom of expression, which is obviously critical to balance in terms of proportionality with safety. So I think actually the benefit of Ofcom to the subject matter is really helpful. But also, and I've been regulated by Ofcom for it's coming up to its 20-year birthday this year, a bit younger than the likes of Google, but I've been regulated by Ofcom for probably nearly that 20 years without aging myself. And they are a fantastic regulator to work with. They are evidence-based, they are pragmatic, they are proportionate, and they invest in the relationships with the firms that they regulate, because what they want to get at the end of the day is positive results. And in this case, that means keeping children safer online.
Brilliant. Okay. Lorna, you have a really interesting perspective on all of this. And just go back to the creation story, if you will, of the Online Harms Bill, which became the Online Safety Bill. Why did you even write what you wrote, and how is it different from what perspective you took?
Well, the work I did started actually back in around 2015, 2016, working with an MP on a private member's bill. And we were at that stage trying to get better tools for users. For those interested in policy history, I think it was called the Malicious Communications Social Media Bill. Obviously, private members' bill goes nowhere, but the seed of an idea was planted. And so when we saw the Green Paper, I was working with Will Perrin at Carnegie UK Trust on another project, and we started talking about it. And I think a couple of realisations that although the platforms may not have an editorial role, they are not neutral. They affect the environment. But also that in the offline world, we have lots of different environments to engage in, whereas online there seems to be quite an idea of all the content everywhere. And so you don't get differentiation of behaviour and recognition that what's acceptable for some people in some contexts is not acceptable for others in other contexts. And thinking about that, we thought Health and Safety at Work Act, dating back from 1974, which imposed a general duty on people running workspaces to keep those spaces safe. And that's the word, safe. Very broad, not defined to the 77th degree. But what it is looking at your environment and thinking, how could things go wrong? What do we see happening? Can we improve that? So it's about being reasonable and looking at what is foreseeable. So in a sense, what we were talking about is, I guess, product safety as well. But looking at products and thinking, what happens when this scales? What happens when the bad people get a hold of this? So we were proposing a shift from regulation of individual items of content, which is where we came from with the broadcasting environment, to saying, let's look at the layer below that let's look at the systems, and not just the software itself, but the business environment and the way the business is organised. So how the workflow goes through. How are you developing products? Are you sticking trust and safety in at the end, or is it right there in the beginning? I give an example and say, if you were in a health and safety environment, you'd be looking for the sticking up floorboards and the missing light bulbs. You wouldn't start with, how do I stop people breaking their legs? So in a way, it's starting with the product and looking at its consequences. It's not looking at content and working back. And I think if I'm looking for differences between what I proposed in the Online Safety Bill, I think that's maybe a point of difference, that the Online Safety Bill does identify different forms of content. So that is where I come from. It's not about looking for perfection. It's looking about what's reasonable, and it's recognising that product safety is not a safety bullet, but it can make things more manageable, so that when you do start looking at individual items of content, then it's maybe more manageable and you're not in quite so much of a whack-a-mole position.
You know, you're saying that just makes me think, and in some parts of the States, we've gone beyond your idea of, going after content. We're actually going after specific apps to delete. And it's 180 to what you were describing a few years ago. So that's a little depressing looking at it, because I have to say, personally, I really appreciate your approach, this more risk-based approach, duty of care approach. Your recent research, is this along the same lines, or what are you looking at right now?
Well, at the moment, what we're looking at is, in a way, how do you move this beyond one jurisdiction? So what I have hypothesised is that you could come up with a model code of practice, a model risk assessment framework, if you like. And when I say model, I don't mean perfect. I mean pro forma, or a starting point, because all content flows across the same frameworks. So you've got the same points at which you can ask questions about how things are working. So I was proposing that you could have a code that was structured on a four-stage information flow. So you've got content creation, which could include account creation. So do you allow anonymous accounts? Do you allow bots? What are the filters you're using? Do you allow Gen AI tools for content creation? Those sorts of questions. Next stage is content discovery. So that would be the recommender algorithm, of course, but also, have you got autoplays? What are the defaults on those? You've then got user response. So user tools to protect yourself, but also things like like buttons and upvotes, because those have an impact on user behaviour. And then finally, the last stage is the service response in terms of moderation and those sorts of controls. So I was wondering, can you develop a code that you can deploy against different legal contexts and different problem contexts, but is based on that same framework? So your questions are the same, maybe your answers are different, depending on the context. So we did some work on hate speech, and we actually did have some of the services in the room, as well as civil society groups, and we took the same model and tried to deploy it also in the context of violence against women and girls. And we found the same questions were relevant, although some of the issues were different.
Yep.
Right. Fascinating. By the way, I forgot to mention, we will be coming to you all for questions, so get those ready. I'm going to just open this up now. And, with the Digital Services Act, there's going to be the creation of 30 new digital service regulators in Europe. I'm really looking at you, Niamh. What's the impact going to be across Europe, and for that matter, for you personally as a regulator here in Ireland and in Europe, of these new regulatory folks showing up? And are we going to have a united or somewhat united approach to online safety regulation?
I'm very excited by it. I think if we're the lone voice in Ireland or the UK or indeed any country across the world, it would indeed be a lone voice indeed. So I think the fact that together with the European Commission, we have all the European Digital Services coordinators in each individual EU member states working together, that will really move the conversation on, and we will see an impact in relation to online safety both across the EU, and it will have a wider impact as well. In addition to that work at a European level, Gill and I are part of the Global Online Safety Regulators Network. So they're together with Julie Mungrant, the Safety Commissioner in Australia, from whom we've learned a lot since we've started, and Fiji and some other member states come on board as well. That ensures that globally we're having these conversations and that we're aligning and we're focusing on what are our top priorities and how can we best address those, because we're very conscious that indeed many of the platforms are also in multi-jurisdictions, and if we propose an approach in one country and it has to be tailor-made or slightly tweaked in each individual country, it's harder for platforms to comply. And as Jill says, we all want to achieve the outcome, which is, you know, a reduction in harmful illegal content online or a safer internet, first of all, particularly our children. And so the more we can be aligned in what we're asking for, the better. So we very much would have a safety by design approach in terms of how that can best be achieved, and a principle-based approach also, because the technology and indeed today's conference title, innovation, it will move faster than we can put our codes down on paper. So if we are too prescriptive, we'll get out of date very quickly. So I suppose for us, it's very important that we are giving the same message as global regulators in this space. And I think that the more of us that are having these conversations and talking about this, then the better it is for all of us.
Joe?
Well, and I might just go back to something Lorna said, because I think, you know, having inspired the bill in the first place, and huge thank you, I think the good news is that so much of that has preserved. So I think it is systems and processes regulation that starts with good governance and a risk assessment. And this is, you know, I said they were regulatory cousins earlier. This is a sort of common across both of them. So the responsibility for the firm is to conduct the risk assessment, identify the risks on their online services, and then to act in a proportionate way to reduce that risk. And what we're doing through the global network and also domestically with the other UK regulators, such as the Information Commissioner's Office, who are also key to this, is making sure that we're coordinating so that we don't, for example, deviate in unwarranted ways. There may be deviations because laws put you in different places or local norms, but we appreciate that for global firms who are trying to implement these regulations in many different jurisdictions, unwarranted deviations are impractical and unhelpful. So that's one of the reasons for us coordinating so heavily.
Do you have any views on this, Lorna?
I suppose going back to basics, one of the advantages I thought about a systems and processes approach is that to some extent it avoids the context specificity of content. You can agree, I think, more easily on how you set up a good risk management approach than you can by about deciding what the precise boundary of acceptable porn is or what really constitutes hate speech, which can be quite context specific. So I think in terms of the shift towards this approach, it does make it easier, though obviously I'm not in the room, but I suspect it makes it easier for regulators to find at least some common ground and that it's more workable at an international level as a result.
Actually, I'm going to stay with you, Lorna, because these two will probably be far too diplomatic to answer this question. But what on earth do you make of the United States from your perspective when it comes to these questions? We're sitting here with regulatory folks who have these responsibilities. There's no one that I can go to in Washington to say, hey, we have some issues to do with X, Y, and Z on the internet. What do you make of the American approach, shall we call it?
Well, it's very different, isn't it?
You're just as diplomatic as these two.
Well, it clearly is. I mean, I think the American position has been influenced, perhaps not consciously, but by the First Amendment.
Right.
Whereas I think more generally, even in the ICCPR, the UN Convention, and certainly in Europe, freedom of expression is an important right, but it is not an unlimited right, and it is not the most important thing. And so I think there is maybe more space for balancing in that framework, and easier to perhaps articulate the balance than it is when you have, such a strong emphasis on free speech.
You're very kind. I agree. I mean, I think First Amendment is an issue. I think we now have a much broader issue, and that's simply the culture wars, the just extraordinary differences now politically between blue and red states and all of that stuff. So anyway, either of you want to make a diplomatic response to my question?
I think that we are having this conversation. You have brought over so many people from the States. And as we said, regulators are just one part of the conversation, one part of the jigsaw. So I think that it's listening to children, putting the rights of the child centre, listening to parents, listening to platforms, listening to many non-governmental organisations working in the sector. So the voice is still heard. Perhaps you're saying the regulator is missing so far. That may change in time, but that's not to say you're not part of the conversation, because there's so many different parts to it.
Yeah.
I think what we hope to offer as well is if we can inspire a path or share learnings along the way in terms of how we are, our successes, then I hope there are many in implementing systems and processes regulation that absolutely can really be effective and highly effective in keeping children safer online. And I think sort of being transparent, not only offering transparency over how services are doing in that, which the powers absolutely require us to do, but also being transparent along the way in our own learnings in that, I hope we can offer a way forward.
Thank you. For the record, at the beginning of the Obama administration, this is how far I'm going to date myself, we did propose a Chief Online Safety Officer for the United States to be based in the Chief Technology Officer's office, the CTO, to coordinate the many different branches of government, because we have to visit 6, 7, maybe 8 different departments to talk about different aspects, and we don't have any of that internal coordination. So anything you guys can do to help on that proposal would be great. I'm going to come to the audience in a moment. I don't know if we have microphones. We have microphones. We have microphones that they throw at you. I don't know if you've been to a Google. In one moment, not just yet. I've got one more question, then I'm coming to the. Why don't we talk about Gen AI? And let's make the distinction, as Marka made, between AI and Gen AI. We've had AI for years, decades, whatever. Gen AI is this kind of new thing. Some see it as big a moment as the Gutenberg press. Others see it as the end of the world as we know it. And still others go, let's just, come on, this is way too overhyped. It's an interesting new tool. How are you two, from a regulatory position, what's your perspective on dealing with Gen AI? I'll start with you, Niamh.
Sure. So we'll be waiting formally to have regulatory powers once the draft AI regulation at EU level is passed. But I think in the interim, it's probably no different than many other new products or services that are rolled out. In addition to doing a privacy impact assessment, you could do a safety impact assessment or a security impact assessment to consider the implications of the product and how to mitigate against those particular harms that could occur.
Okay. How are you guys? Are you having sort of war room discussions about this, or is it just part of the broader perspective?
Spent a lot. Personally, I've spent a lot of time on it, and I play around with Bard. I play around with ChatGPT, because I think it's really important to have a sort of first-hand user experience of what these technologies can do, and they're very exciting. And there are huge immediate applications in creativity across all sorts of media businesses and more broadly. So I'm excited. limited by what they can do, but they also have the potential, as many technologies do, to bring harm with them, and particularly for children as well. So now whether it's at the sort of the hype or the sort of end of the world scale, I think certainly we're treating it as a paradigm shift, and therefore, and it's also happened at a time where for the online safety bill, we've always wanted that to be technology neutral and future-proofed. And of course, this is a pretty big test of whether it is technology neutral and future-proofed. And the good news is that there's a lot of use cases which have been exploded in their take-up recently that we think are firmly in the scope of the bill. So, for example, if a user is creating a piece of content through DALI and then they put it up on Instagram and they post it onto Instagram, then that becomes in scope of the bill, and Instagram will need to do a risk assessment on that and look to reduce any risk if they deem there to be so. Likewise, if ChatGPT is plugged into Bing, search services are in scope of the bill. So again, you'd need to look at the risk that search service and all its component parts are posing to users, particularly children. And then the final third part of the bill that is pornographic services, and there's obviously a lot of potential for how generative AI can generate all sorts of pornography, and that's one of the things that's being debated has been debated through the amendments to the bill. So the final position on that isn't yet clear. But so I think what we were saying is we will be from the day our sort of powers commence in this autumn, we will be regulating Gen AI, and therefore back to the point about learnings. I think that will offer us huge learnings in terms of really understanding the risk that these services pose and working with the platforms in a very context-specific way as to how they might reduce the risks. And I think just from a commercial perspective, and because I come from a commercial background, the race conditions involved in Gen AI are sort of unprecedented. So the speed at which these services are being rolled out throughout products, potentially without guardrails or with less guardrails than you would apply if you'd have had more time, I think is one for all regulators to be keeping a really close watch on, because those race conditions are really notable in the space of Gen AI.
Okay. Lorna, do you have any views on this?
I agree with Gill that, in principle, AI in general and Gen AI in specific could be within the scope of the online safety bill. I think in terms of some of the specific duties that are on regulated services, I don't know how much tweaking will have to go on to make them appropriate to a new environment, but I think in principle they could be covered. I think in principle where personal data is involved in Gen AI, then the Data Protection Act 2018 and the GDPR apply, laws in general apply. So the Health and Safety at Work Act, tools in the workplace could cover Gen AI tools, and I think there is a danger generally when we talk about the new tech gizmo to think it comes into a vacuum, and because the law doesn't mention that particular technology on the face of it, the law doesn't apply, and that's just not true. I think there are going to be some edge case questions about possibly when is an AI a user in its own right, and when is it a tool controlled by another user maybe? Are there going to be questions around immunity, intermediary immunity? Maybe. There are some edge cases, but in principle, it's covered.
Good to hear. I think I saw a hand over here. Yes. Can we throw it? Yeah, let's just do that. Demonstrate. No, you go ahead. Isn't that the coolest
Bought
thing?
him at school.
Yeah.
I'm Julie from Yoti. It was just picking up on Gill's point with regards to transparency. looking at all of the literature around technology, one of the big problems for the public is how to trust. And I just wondered, what would good be if you were looking at transparency from providers, from platforms, if you could paint what you would really like to see in terms of transparency that we as an industry can do to be supportive, be we providers, be we platforms, what would be that direction of travel at the sort of companies creating safety tech, the companies using safety tech? What would you think would be the most constructive that we can all try to work towards?
That is such a great question. Thank you very much. And if I will kick off. So I think firstly, and while I won't have a sort of end answer today, it is that exact debate is the debate that we are having internally at the Ofcom at the moment, which is with these transparency powers, what does good look like? How should that show up to the public? And I think, so let's start with what can transparency do. I think transparency can really shine a light on both best practice and practice that is falling short of the expectations that we are going to set as minimum expectations. So I think it's really important there. And I think whilst, and ultimately transparency can build trust, and it can hopefully build trust in us as a regulator that we're doing a really good job. It can build trust in the firms that are investing, really investing in making sure that they are providing a safe environment for their users and in particular children. And it can build trust in sort of online and online experiences as a whole. So I think it's a really important lever where I think we will be consulting on how to use our transparency powers. So we will get into sort of design phase at that point, and we will be engaging widely with industry in terms of what looks right, what looks wrong, what's actually useful, and engaging with children and families at that point as well, because this is a sort of wider than an industry piece. To your point, this is about, offering sort of better, more informed choices to the public.
Did you want to tackle it as well or not?
I was going to tag on to maybe an aspect of transparency, not just that there be transparency reports available on a website that nobody checks out, but that we could really kind of work on digital literacy and media literacy and civility in general, and just raising that awareness and education. And I think we as regulators have a role there, and industry also, together with the NGOs, and how we can heighten awareness of how to navigate safer online and what tools are out there to assist in relation to that.
Quickly.
Just to add, I think transparency might mean different things in different contexts. So there'll be one, set of transparency expectations when you're talking about the company speaking to the regulator, maybe a different set of transparency expectations when the regulator produces reports for Parliament, but maybe different transparency expectations for what's useful to users and even different groups of users. So I think we need to break down transparency as providing information for technical purposes and transparency as, a trust mark.
We have a hand over here. Julie, how's your arm? Fantastic.
Itai from ActiveFence. Question following up on the Gen AI question, specifically around disinformation. And in the DSA, that is covered for the very large online platforms, but not for all the rest. I'd be happy to hear, Niamh, from your perspective, how do you see that for the rest of companies? And Gill, from your perspective, how is that going to be tackled within the Online Safety Bill?
So in relation to disinformation, it's not covered by our Domestic Online Safety and Media Regulation Act. It's not one of the types of harms that are called out within it. The types of harms that are called out within it, there's 42 offence-based harms. Then there's things like cyberbullying, promoting eating, feeding disorders, self-harm and suicide. Separately under the DSA, disinformation is discussed at the DSA level, and the proposal is that the current code of practice in relation to disinformation could be put in a co-regulatory footing or more effective footing than it is currently, where some members are even leaving the current voluntary code of practice in relation to disinformation. Here in Ireland, we also have a national counter-disinformation strategy working group, and we're going to be doing a consultation on that later this summer as to how to tackle disinformation. So yes, it's part of having a code of practice, but then it also comes back to this media literacy, digital awareness, how do we counter disinformation through education as well, and to empowering users to be able to assess for themselves what's reliable or not in terms of source of news.
Great. Oh, sorry, did you want to?
No.
Great. I think we have another question. Itai, can you throw that?
What's much more frightening than asking a question is having to catch in front of all these people.
With everyone looking at you.
Ian Corby from the Age Verification Providers Association. I think there were 144 pieces of state legislation last year requiring some sort of age verification in the US. You've got to really feel sorry for big platforms drowning in all this legislation around the world. Have you looked at whether international standards could be a lifebuoy for these people as a way of, whatever your legislation, when regulators actually cross the T's and dot the I's, start pointing to some international standards? We kicked off some in the EU consent project, which is interoperable age assurance in that area with the IEEE and ISO. But I think it would be applicable on all aspects of safety tech to try to get some commonality around the world. Have you looked at that? Thanks.
So for that very reason, we've kicked off and partake in an international working group on age assurance and age verification. So I think your point is very well made. One of the things we will look for is when firms are determining that they need to there are risks to children and therefore they need to be able to determine the age of the child. It's looking at that in the context, but also making sure that's proportionate in the context, but making sure it's highly effective as well. And therefore, I think the role of international standards. Look, we all know about international standards. The challenge is they don't happen overnight. They take a long time to come through. But absolutely, we're putting our effort into the international community for that exact reason.
Niamh, do you want to tackle it?
No, I was just going to echo what Jill said. We're also aligned, and we've been discussing age verification, age assurance, and I suppose it depends on the type of age and appropriate content and what we don't want children to access. And there are different, I think as you mentioned earlier in your conversation, there are different scales in relation to where is there a need for hard age verification, where is there a need for more effective forms of age assurance than perhaps are currently in place. So in relation to the more serious and more age-inappropriate or harmful content, in particular for children in relation to, say, pornography or extreme violence, then that's where we would see a need for more hard forms of age verification. The difficulty with mandating a particular form of technology or a standard is that these things evolve and change over time. A lot of good work is done in the age of age estimation, age inference through AI or otherwise, which is different to, I suppose, hard age verification, where you're uploading actual documentary evidence. So I think standards would be really useful because we'd all be then speaking the same language as well. But I do think because the technology is evolving so quickly here, we have to leave space for innovation as well.
Okay. We're quickly running out of time. I'm going to ask you all pretty much the same last question is, what are you most hopeful for between now and the end of the year? And I guess, Lorna, I want to start with you, and you can answer it in whichever way you like, but if you would like to answer, what are you most hopeful for this online safety bill between now and the end of the year? But if you don't want to answer that, just whatever else. Maybe it's your garden you're hopeful for.
Yeah, the garden will be good. I would quite like it actually to happen.
It will.
I know, but I've thought that before. Possibly annually every year since about 2019. So yes, I want to see us move past, if you like, the legislative process and to a certain extent the political slogans that you always get in the legislative programme, and to see Gill hit the send button on the, 42 documents that you have to produce, so we can actually move to the practicalities.
Great answer. Jill, what are you hopeful for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hugely excited about this year and what can be achieved this year. So I think in the UK, we will have an Act which will be a major step forward in keeping children safer online. And on the day our powers commence, we are readying ourselves to produce the first set of consultation documents, which will be around risk assessment and illegal harms. And we would love all of you to engage in those consultations. They are genuine consultations. We really want your feedback. We've put in an enormous amount of man hours, and the team are nearing exhaustion levels. But the amount of expertise and time and preparation that has gone into these, I think, really warrant a really healthy conversation on what have we got right, what have we missed, what are the opportunities, so that we can make this regime really effective to the benefit of children.
Brilliant. Thank you. Niamh, hopeful.
I'm really hopeful that this time next year we will actually see like a tangible impact and a reduction in illegal or harmful content online, so that our regulatory efforts, whether it's the Digital Services Act at European level, the Online Safety Bill in the UK having coming into effect, and Ofcom then like having their effective regulatory regime in place, or we in Ireland having our online safety code in place, that it will all have brought about an actual change, so a tangible benefit, so that there is a reduction of illegal content online, there is a reduction of harmful content online, that algorithms are not amplifying harmful content online, and that children, indeed all of us, do feel safer online, and that we can point to those tangible benefits, that children aren't being contacted by strangers because there are now defaults in place or otherwise that prevent them from being contacted by strangers, and that it really has made a difference.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for that. I remain hopeful that one day we will get a Chief Online Safety Officer for the United States, and that person will keynote the FOSI annual conference and will join the Global Online Safety Regulators Network to work with you guys on getting some kind of global, at least approaches, not necessarily the same ideas, but approaches. So anyway, with that, please join me in thanking this wonderful panel.